Oi mate, and welcome to Vox Terra. Today reporting from the land down under. On a news program called Democracy Now!, I heard the Australian election results described as a green wave, meaning candidates who campaigned on climate won and won big. Well, the host of that program, Amy Goodman, interviewed a guest named Tim Flannery, leading Australian climate activist, scientist, and writer. Now, according to him, polls showed that climate was one of the most important issues in this last election. And he describes that as being, in part at least, because of the catastrophic impacts of climate change that Australia has been experiencing in the past 3 years since the previous election, where voters elected pro-coal and described as politically conservative Scott Morrison as Prime Minister. Well, after the Prime Minister's election, Australia was racked by massive, historic wildfires. Quoting from Flannery, before those wildfires, the largest area burned in Australia by fire was about 2%. But during those fires, 21% of the forest burned. Wow, from 2% historically to 21%. Thousands lost their homes, and only 10% of those people have managed to get back into a house since the event. Some still camping out. But from fire to flood, followed in quick succession by some of the most severe floods the nation has ever seen. Entire rural cities devastated by unprecedented flooding, and the flooding has gone on and on. But he points out it isn't just rural Australia being devastated. Major cities were blanketed in toxic smoke. Hundreds of people died. People at the beach were covered in ash as falling debris fell out of the sky. And he says that Sydney, which used to be a beautiful city with yellowish sandstone buildings, well, he says all that sandstone is turned black from mold. People's houses covered in mildew, and beaches made unusable due to the runoff from sewage and other pollution sources. Now listen to this quote, and think if this isn't true to wherever you are to some degree. Life for Australians has changed. That lovely sunny country that I remember so well is a distant memory now. Wow, that lovely sunny country that he knew so well, a distant memory. Well, friends, this is happening everywhere. And I've explained in my show, and this is corroborated with Union of Concerned Scientists, Natural Resource Defense Council. It's basically what NASA and NOAA are saying, but just getting little attention. Wildfires, floods on the rise. Extreme precipitation on the rise. As these air masses heat up, those air masses hold more moisture, pulling more out of the soil. So you get that air just holds onto it longer, and you either get intense rain or prolonged drought. Add in heat, add in the warmer oceans, all the weather patterns are getting thrown off and becoming less stable. But most people don't seem able to see this because our media is not highlighting it or explaining it to them. And as far as I'm aware, at least in the United States, the education system barely, if ever, mentions greenhouse gases. So the kids grow up not even knowing what these are. They have no connection. Putting 40 billion tons annually of fossil fuels in the atmosphere each year, roughly, according to NOAA about that, is actually doing anything. And remember, it sure ain't good to breathe in. And change comes rapidly, but in the same way, kind of slowly. So there's this memory problem. We're like frogs in that pot of boiling water. It keeps getting warmer and warmer and warmer. And you think, well, wasn't it always like this? Until it boils. So why are Australians getting it? And getting it despite the fact that Australia is the home to Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is the founder of Fox News and owns a massive media empire, which influences people's thinking all over the planet. And citing Public Citizen, Fox News has been a major promoter, or at least putting on climate change deniers, which really we shouldn't even call them climate change deniers. We should call them fossil fuel defenders or business as usual defenders, blocking our change, our transition towards a cleaner, greener, less toxic economy. So all I can surmise, the reason the message is getting through, it must be due to activists like us, people willing to speak up and get out there and do the work. My impression is Australia has a very strong, lively Extinction Rebellion scene, which is a very youthful movement. So based on that article and others I've read for you, this election was a big win for those campaigning on the environment and climate change. But notice I gave a little caveat saying people campaigning on it. And it was a loss for those blatantly pro-fossil fuels or pro-coal. Now, in Australia, coal and gas are major industries, but they're not all that there is to Australia. Same as in the United States. They're big industries, but there's more to the economy. But it's overcoming that industry's influence that's the challenge. Now, what people describe as the pro-coal conservative party is, interestingly to many Americans and others, named the Liberal Party. I'll touch back on that. The Liberal Party lost the most seats. Scott Morrison is out. The Labour Party is described as center-left, made the most gains, with Anthony Albanese already sworn in as Australia's new Prime Minister. And according to Flannery and others, while better than the Conservative Party on climate change and environmental issues in general, has not been a strong leader on the issue. The election also represented a resurgence for the Greens Party, and that will be key to holding Labour accountable, and gains for a really interesting political phenomena called the Teals. The Teals apparently are the independent, who are somewhat conservative, and it's largely women, but are very pro-climate change action. And I am not aware of this existing anywhere else. And I think that last thing is very important to the future of humanity, because people identify as conservative or liberal or socialist or capitalist they for very personal and very different reasons. So one lesson is, I believe it's really important to take the climate change issue, the pushing back against the fossil fuel industry power, into every political camp. You may disagree with conservatives, or maybe you are conservative, and you could have very different reasons for why you identify how you do. You could be speaking right past each other. So I don't see how we're going to make it if we stay atomized in two warring camps, with one side 100% right and the other side 100% wrong. Now, another caveat is that it sounds to me, based on a financial article I read, that the Labour Party, while being better than the Liberal, which is the Conservative Party, and analogous to the Republican Party in America, is still wants to make nice with that gas and coal industry and would like to continue exports, and it will only be the influence of Greens and I suppose Teals to prevent that from happening. So it's analogous to America, because here we see, with the election of Joe Biden, many on the left and those who supported Bernie Sanders, like myself, felt that Biden, a lot of people call them corporate Democrats, meaning they want to make nice with those big industries. But remember, it goes without saying that the Republican Party is highly influenced by the fossil fuel industry. So here we saw that Joe Biden took on many of the concerns Bernie Sanders was speaking, but then when he got in office, isn't willing to say fossil fuel industry has too much power, and therefore can't really rally the public to stand up and take a stand for a transition away from that product. And another lesson is that if you are a Democrat, you should be campaigning on the environment, because here that is the winning issue. I really believe that. I know a lot of people think people don't care about the environment, but it's not true. When I was really young, I more identified as a conservative Republican, but it was really reading environmentalist publications, finding out that Reagan in particular was really gutting all these regulations and opening up new lands to oil and gas and that kind of thing, that got me to question it. And to this day, decades later, whenever I speak to my more conservative friends or acquaintances, I always let them know that issue, and they always agree. But yet I rarely have heard Democrats campaigning and leading on that issue. And if you identify as conservative, well, look, remember what I've said before, that the climate change denial isn't truly a conservative issue. It's the fossil fuel industry, as far as I'm concerned, or the reckless elements of that industry wrapping themselves in a conservative cloak. You got to figure out a way to shake that and maybe take a lesson from the Teals. Oh yeah, and they're called Teals because it's this combination of blue, which is the Australian Liberal Party or the Conservative Party's color, inverse of the Democrat Republicans in America, and green. You mix the two together, you got teal. Well, hey, before I wrap it up, you might be curious, where is the history of this with how come people, what we would call conservatives, or many people call conservatives, are the Liberal Party in Australia? Well, a partial answer I have for that is based on a political science course I took years ago, and the professor explained that liberalism, originally going back to maybe the Industrial Revolution times or around there, was the philosophy that defended the emerging, what used to be called bourgeois or capitalist class, against the established order, which was represented by aristocracy, royalty, that church-state combination. So liberalism originally was a champion of capitalism. And at that time period, it was the socialist movement, or actual leftist movement that was championing workers and those kind of average people. Well, eventually, at least in the American context, the term liberal became wrapped up with some social reforms and the government helping people. And in that regard, what you could call progressive, whereas the term conservative then became associated with with defending now the new established order or the established business interests. So hey, I hope you found this video helpful, interesting, entertaining. And if you did, please make sure you're liking, you're commenting, you're subscribing, clicking the notification bell so you know I'm putting up a new video. And until next time, and as always, peace be with you.